Have you ever stopped to think about how a war can do more than just end? How it can completely rewrite not only the lines on a map, but the very idea of who we are? Well, let's get into it, because the end of World War I did exactly that. It didn't just stop the fighting. Nope. It shattered an old world and built a new one from scratch, changing what nation and identity even mean. Forever.
Okay, just look at this. Seriously. On the left, you've got Europe in 1914, dominated by a few giant empires. Then, on the right, the 1920s. It's a totally different continent. The borders are scrambled, huge regions have new names, and entire empires have just vanished. This one image really captures the incredible scale of the change we're about to explore.
So to really get a grip on that massive change, we have to rewind to the world before 1914. It was a world that was basically running on a different operating system. It wasn't really a continent of nation-states like we think of today. It was a continent of empires.
First up, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This thing was a sprawling, multi-ethnic state right in the heart of Europe. It ruled over Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Slovaks, and so many others, all under a single emperor.
Then you had the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, it controlled these huge territories across Southeast Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. It was a true mosaic of different peoples, religions, and languages.
And over to the east, you've got the Russian Empire, stretched across a mind-boggling amount of land. A colossal power, ruled by the Tsar, home to dozens of distinct ethnic groups, from Poles and Finns to Ukrainians and Georgians.
And finally, the German Empire. It was pretty new on the scene, but incredibly powerful, forged in the late 19th century. These four empires, they were basically the pillars of the old European order.
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. How did people think about themselves back then? If you ask someone who they were, they probably wouldn't say, "I'm an Austro-Hungarian." They might say they're from a certain village, or that they speak Polish, or that they're Catholic. See, their identity was local. And their allegiance? It was to some distant emperor or king, not to a nation as we understand it. For millions of people, that just wasn't the main thing.
And then, everything changed. The First World War wasn't just a conflict. It was the earthquake that brought that entire imperial structure crashing down. The war was so brutal, so total, that the old world just couldn't survive it.
And what's wild is just how fast this all happened. The war kicks off in 1914. By the time it's over in 1918, all four of those great empires, the Russian, the Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, and the German, are either gone or in their final death throes. 4 years of war basically erased centuries of history, leaving this huge power vacuum.
So what do you do with all the rubble? How do you build a new, hopefully more stable Europe? Well, out of the ashes came this really powerful idea. It was championed by world leaders like U.S. President Woodrow Wilson as a key part of his 14 points for peace. It was meant to be the blueprint for a better world, and it was called self-determination.
So what is national self-determination really? Well, the core idea is that people who share a common language, culture, and identity, a nation, should have the right to govern themselves, in their own country. No more being a minority stuck in someone else's empire. It sounds simple, right? It sounds fair.
And you can see that idea in action right here. The mapmakers at the peace conferences started creating brand new countries based on this principle. Poland literally reappeared on the map after being gone for over a century. New states like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia were born, carved out of the old empires, all designed to be homelands for specific national groups.
But, and this is a big but, this is where that simple, idealistic theory smashed right into a very messy, very human reality. Because, drawing lines on a map is one thing. Drawing them through people's homes and communities is something else entirely.
And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the problem. The promise was beautiful, a nation for every people. But the reality? It was flawed. Europe wasn't some neat patchwork of ethnicities where you could just draw a clean line. People were all mixed together. And frankly, the borders were often drawn in a hurry, guided as much by politics and power as by any noble principle.
Just let that number sink in for a second. Millions. In the process of creating new nations for some groups, the peacemakers created brand new minorities for others. All of a sudden, Germans found themselves living in a new country called Poland or Czechoslovakia. Hungarians were suddenly citizens of Romania. The problem wasn't solved. In a lot of ways, it was just reshuffled and made worse.
And this, of course, had a massive human cost. It created immediate tension between the new majority groups and the new minorities. It bred this deep resentment among people who felt like their identity had been totally ignored. A powerful feeling of injustice took hold. And so, national identity, which was supposed to bring people together, was now a major source of conflict all over the continent.
And make no mistake, this wasn't just some problem for the 1920s that went away. The consequences of redrawing that map have echoed down through the decades, shaping conflicts and political debates that are still going on today.
You know, this quote from our source material really just nails it. The end of the war wasn't just about moving borders on a piece of paper. It was about changing hearts and minds. It forced millions of people to ask themselves, who are we and where do we belong? And suddenly, the answers to those questions could be dangerous.
And all of this leaves us with a final, critical question, one that's just as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. If we define our nations by lines on a map, what happens to the people who are caught in between? It's definitely something worth thinking about.